It's life. It's life, actually. What's that?
This stuff that's being flushed.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Good, this is very interesting. Hi, I'm Brenda Jackie. We had some email.
Yeah, Scott, nice to see you.
Good to see you. Nice in person.
Real.
Where are you sitting?
Oh, this is mine. Oh, did you have a camera set up? Did you need a hybrid? I'm sorry, I didn't think of that. We're doing hybrid? Then I gotta stay. Are we doing Zoom also? Oh, okay. So there's no camera. Okay, I can live with that. Were you, sorry, I was just moving stuff, so are you, I need to stay back in there. Yeah, if you're recording. And I'm gonna move this back, sorry, I shut that. Oh, it's up there. But can I be down here? His name? No problem. I'll, put it back to you. What's that?
It's a handheld mic just
Oh,
in case.
yeah,
So
that'd be great.
Just make sure it's turned on.
Thanks.
And you have to speak like directly into it
Yeah.
also. So.
And the on is right there. Got it. You got another mic up here too, in case you want to know. That's number 2. You got this is number 1. Either one doesn't matter to me.
Oh yeah, they're both.
But I think if you need me to stay here and then I can't walk around.
Just like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, no, no, no. Great.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Schulman. I'm the chair of the Israel Committee here at TBS. Obviously, we have some technical issues, so we're not going to be able to show slides, but we will email the slides to you. We will email the slides to you tomorrow or the next day, so you'll be able to see the presentation. We're very lucky here to have Scott Levin here today. He's the regional director of the Mountain States Division of the ADL. He's been regional director for a while. He assumed this position in December 2010 after 30 years as a successful trial attorney. Since he's a very good trial attorney, he's very nimble on his feet, and he could probably work without his slides. He's Phi Beta Kappa from George Washington University and graduated from the University of Denver Law School. Prior to being as a professional staff member of ADL, he was a member of was that National Board of Directors? Or the National Board of Directors, and he's a recipient of the 2010 Torch of Liberty Award. So I'm very, very pleased to have Scott Levin present to us today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm going to turn this on and see if it blows anybody out. So there you go. So I'm sorry that we weren't able to have the slides, and so you'll just have to imagine what I spent time yesterday doing, putting together the pretty pictures and all of those things, and instead you're going to have to just look at me while we do this. But I'm really, really pleased to be able to come down here and talk on such what I think is an important topic. It's existential issues that are facing our people. I'm hoping that this is going to be a discussion of sorts. I look forward to getting other people's opinions and back and forth on it. Before I start, though, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Anti-Defamation League. It's been around since 1913, so it really has been involved in this business for quite a while. Throughout that entire time, the mission has been exactly the same, which is to not only stop the defamation of the Jewish people, which means to fight anti-Semitism, they just didn't really have those words at that time, but also to secure justice and fair treatment to all. And I'm one of the luckiest people that are around, because if somebody took me and put me on a desert island somewhere and said, sort of come up with a mission statement, or what your thoughts of things that you would be involved with, it would be both trying to defend the Jewish people and also defend all people. I'm really guided by the Pirkei Avot, where Hillel the elder, you know the three questions. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And that's really the embodiment, I think, of what we do at the ADL. We have 25 offices across the country. My region is called the Mountain States region, and it is Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. We had a person that was on the ground here in New Mexico up till about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm really working I wouldn't say how hard, since we're inside the sanctuary, but I'm working really hard to try and get somebody to come back to help us. I want to just skip forward. One of the things I made a slide about, because it is a sensitive, tough issue, so I wanted to just lay out a few ground rules that I think will help us with our conversation. First, I'm looking forward to a respectful dialogue with people. I know there are strong feelings on each side of these issues. And I'll ask everybody to assume good intent. I think that we all think deeply about all kinds of issues that are going on, and we're not coming from bad places. We're coming from a good place. I want everyone to recognize my goal is not to change anybody's mind. I'm really about trying to tell you where my position is on this and try and educate people a little bit on what these issues are that we're grappling with. They're tough issues. I'm hoping that people will actively listen, but that they'll also engage. And then finally, I just want to make sure that everybody will make space for other people's opinions. If you're going to speak, just know when to step forward and when to step back a little bit. So if that's fair, we can go forward. The other really basic rule in this area that I want to tell people about is criticism of the policies of the state of Israel are not anti-Semitic, and they're not even anti-Zionist. People can have differences of opinion about policies that exist in the same way that I would surprise you, complain about things that go on in the United States all the time, and policies and leaders and choices that are made, and I don't think that makes me any less an American or even a patriot. So the first thing that I want to start with is, how do we define what Zionism is? Because I think it's one of those kind of words that it means different things to different people, and we don't always have a shared language, and that's part of the issue that I think happens. We'll look at that, and then we'll also look at what anti-Semitism, how do we define anti-Semitism, and maybe how those things sometimes cross bases. Not always, but they can in the Venn diagram. So let's start with Zionism itself. Does anyone have any ideas of what that means? Ivy.
I think it means belief that Israel should exist as a home for the Jewish people.
So Israel should exist as a home for the Jewish people, as Zionism. Any other thoughts? I can wait an uncomfortably long period of time. I've done this before. No. Any other thoughts people have? That's what you think too? Okay. Well, Zionism, as I look at it, is it's a movement. It's a movement for the self-determination and statehood for the Jewish people in the ancestral homeland, which is the land of Israel. So, as such, I think if we break that down a little bit, is it does involve a statehood. It involves the state of Israel. Zion, is that land to which Israel is part of. And what's interesting is that the vast majority of Jews around the world feel a kinship or a connection with Israel. And that's whether or not they explicitly identify as a Zionist or not. And it's regardless of their opinions, as I said before, about the policies or who's leading the government at any particular time. We have this historic, almost in our DNA kind of connection that's going on. And according to the Pew study just a couple of years ago, 80% of Jews say caring about Israel is an essential or important part of what being Jewish means to them. So I take myself, for instance, I've been privileged to go to Israel twice in my life. I didn't go until the last 10, 12 years ago. I went once with ADL. I went once with my temple in Denver that was there. I have zero interest of making Aliyah. It's just not where I'm at. Just a little bit about me. I'm a committed Reformed Jew, whereas I grew up in a conservative synagogue, and I've been a member of a Reformed temple for 40 years. That's there. I am Ashkenazi. I present as a white guy in America. The Holocaust is something that's important to me, and I study it a lot. But my people basically escaped the pogroms when they came over. And through luck, I think I'm standing here. My grandparents did that, so I'm in a second-generation American Jew living in perhaps the most affluent time and a time when Jews have perhaps among the most influence almost anywhere except for Germany before the Holocaust, right? So all of those things inform where I am, and that mission and the Pirkei Avot, the questions of Hillel the Elder, about being able to support not just the Jewish people, but all people, is what really motivates me. Throughout all of that, though, I have this connection that's kind of, in some ways, a little bit strange. We're going to talk a little bit more with Israel. So part of Zionism is also this, even though I might, and many of you might not want to make Aliyah and move to Israel, it is a concept of a return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And, where did that come from? Because it predates Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism. Israel, as we know, is the eternal homeland of the Jewish people. We've had a connection to it for 3,000 years. And there are people that are better historians than I, but that will tell you that for the 1,000 years up until the destruction of the temple, the Jews in that land were an ancient civilization, and that they had all kinds of rituals and other things that bound them to that land. We know that there was a tribal existence that was going on, and then according to the Bible, and whether you believe it as fact or not, with David and Solomon uniting the tribes together, it was around this particular land that all of that took place. But I think the other question that we have to ask is, why has Israel remained so important to Jews for almost 2,000 years when there's only been a small number of people that have lived there all along? Again, going back 2,000 years and the 1,000 years before that, the Hebrews, the ancient Israelites, they were the government, the people, it was their land. But for 2,000 years, until the establishment of the state of Israel, there were hardly any Jews that were there. So anybody have any thoughts as to why we would still feel this connection? David.
Passover, we say next year in Jerusalem.
Yeah, next year, David said, at the end of Passover, we always say next year in Jerusalem. And I kind of think myself, I don't know if this is right, and the medical doctors or psychiatrists or psychologists here might know better, but if I say that every year, and my father said that every year, and my grandmother said it every year, and my great-grandmother, and my great-great-great-grandfather, and all the way back, say the same thing, in some ways it's sort of part of our DNA. It sort of gets inculcated in that. Please tell me your name again, I'm sorry.
Devin,
Thanks, Devin.
I think if the Jews had not been exiled and banned, then the Jews would have just still lived there, and it just hasn't been an option.
So it hasn't been an option because we were exiled from there, first by the Babylonians for a few hundred years, and then by the Romans and when the Second Temple was destroyed. So we haven't had a choice. But without that choice of not being there, why are we still connected to it? Please, what's your name again?
I'm David.
Okay.
Numerous places in our liturgy, in our holy books, reference is made to Israel, to our connection with Israel, to the covenant that Abraham made with God, and how
That's right.
man plays into that. So it is part of our DNA because it comes from the very beginning.
Right. So what David's saying, in case you couldn't hear, was that the land of Israel is inculcated throughout our prayer book, throughout our history, throughout our way of actually operating as a people is all connected to there. And again, whether you believe the Bible as fact or not, and the stories, almost all the Bible stories have to do with that land of Israel, or getting back to the land, because people around it. There are, and I think this is probably your point too, David, is that there are prayers that are out there that are only supposed to be said when we build the temple again and we come back there. I mean, and the fact that those have continued to be passed down from generation to generation is pretty amazing. Anything else, please? What's your name again?
Yeah, I'm Dan.
Hi, Dan.
So, right here behind you is the Aron Kodesh Ark. It faces east. Every synagogue you go to will face Jerusalem.
Right.
In our case, east. Some people might think it's New York, but it's actually Jerusalem. If you are, of course, east of Jerusalem, the Aron Kodesh will be facing
The other way.
west.
So Dan's talking about what I call the Montessori form of Judaism. You know, Montessori, it's all about tactile touching and experiential stuff that you're doing. We get up, we face all of our congregations, or at least the Aron Kodesh, so that we're facing east to remind us of where Jerusalem is. Of course, I have to admit to you that at Temple Emmanuel in Denver, the architect thought it was much better to orient it towards the north because the stained glass looked so much better when the sun was coming down. But we know that it's wrong. So, but we not only read about it, we act about it, we stand up, we look at it to be there. Any other? I think you had another thought.
So, for the millennia, the Jewish people were in exile. We're powerless. We're powerless in every sense. So, I think the desire to have a state again represents a very understandable desire to have nationhood, power, control, agency.
Yeah, so what he's talking about is that this takes us back to a time when we had some sort of power and agency. And part of that also, again, remembering what I said before, that in these past 50 years, we kind of feel very empowered, at least in this country, that's going on. But those of us that study it know that anti-Semitism how it works, it goes up and down of where we are. And you know, please God, we're on a good course. But to be able to hearken back to a time when our people, we could take pride in it, had some strength. Please. What's your name? Sorry?
My name is Lori. I guess I'm a little confused.
That's okay.
My understanding of Zionism is that it's broken down into different schools, one being religious Zionism, the other being political Zionism, kind of serving as a
Sure.
umbrella for many different schools of thought.
Yeah, my question though wasn't about that. My question was, is why do we even care about when we haven't been there? Why is it we don't care about, or we do still care about Israel?
What I'm hearing is that people are feeling a spiritual connection to
Some of it's spiritual. I think what we just heard here is that was just one of pride to the peoplehood, that the people had strength there. The prayer is certainly part of that, but it can be both those things. Do you have another thought as to why?
I always thought that for me, Jerusalem was more of a metaphor, city of peace, so I never really looked at it as the actual city of Jerusalem.
Oh,
So
I'll repeat. That's okay.
I believe that it's more of a metaphor.
Yeah, what she's saying is she didn't see the land itself as being what tied her, Zion, but the metaphor of Jerusalem being a place of peace, which I've heard before too. The only thing is Jerusalem has been in, as far as we know, that's not myth. It's been there as a geographic place, a geographic center, not just for Jews, but it's become a center for others throughout time. But the whole concept for us, again, you can argue whether or not the Bible as fact or not, but the fact that the Western Wall exists, the Kotel, as being the closest place, structure to what was the temple that was there. But also, in addition to a place of pride where the Jews had agency and power, it also served as a place where, for instance, all of our festival holidays, they're not tied to what goes on here in the Western Hemisphere. They're tied to what happens in the land of Israel. For those of you that ever have been to Tisha B'Av, you know, the destruction of the temple and the prayer for the return to that. It's also interesting to me, and when I research this, does anybody know, other than the clergy that might be in the room, why we break a glass at a wedding and yell Mazel Tov? What's the real reason why we break that glass? Devin?
To remember the destruction of the temple?
Yeah, it's really the destruction of the temple and the hope of a return that's gone on. The only other one that I had, and I think it was part of what David was saying, is it's just part of our ritual. And as you were indicating on the prayer side of it, it was 3 times a day, if you were inclined or orthodox and you were praying 3 times a day, you're praying for the return. All of these things, I think, come back into keeping this as in almost sort of a strange way to think that the concept of Zion, the concept of the land of Israel, has been kept alive for such a long time to the Jewish people. And then modern Zionism, which is I think what you're getting to, is that in modern Zionism there were different strains of reasons why people wanted to establish a homeland for people. One of it was the ritualistic, religious, prayerful side of it. The other was political Zionism that went on, to find that homeland where we could have agency again and be able to control ourselves and have the power to protect ourselves. And this, of course, comes up during the mid-1800s when this is really, it predates that for certain, but this is when these strains of thought all start coming together. But in addition to that, there was cultural Zionism that was going on. You know, it was the hope to return to a Hebrew language, to a Hebrew arts, to other things that came along. And what was, I think, at the center, though, of a lot of it is a little bit of what you were talking about, is it presented a concept of a place where we could have a homeland just like other people. Of course, you know that in the mid-19th century, we're starting this whole concept of the nation state that's going on throughout the world, not just for the Jewish people that's going on, but different groupings of people are starting to identify more to the land. And the concept of boundaries is almost changing at that point in time as these nation states are coming together. I think a lot of it, see, I'm just sort of flipping through here, sorry about that. By the time that Herzl comes, Theodor Herzl comes along, this Austrian journalist that takes this on, what he was able to do different than I think what others that have been talking about Zionism is he was able to take all these different strains of it and put it together to get people to agree. And he's famously said, because people always dreamed about next year in Jerusalem, like we say at Passover, it's sort of, if you will it, it isn't a dream. And shortly after, he never lived to see it, but shortly after he passes away, about 13 years later, we have the Balfour Declaration, where the British, through their mandate, are actually trying to legitimize or create this space where the Jews would be. Of course, there's all kinds of conflicting agreements that are going on. There are promises that are made to the Arabs. There are promises that are made to the Jews. They're going on. But with that, it really did bring forth, I think, a starting of more of an in-migration into the land of Israel. The other thing that I wanted to just take a minute and talk to you about was, before I move on to anti-Semitism, is about being an anti-Zionist. Because I'm not sure that everybody agrees what that means either. So that if, for instance, you think that the Palestinians are also entitled to self-determination and statehood, does that make you into an anti-Zionist? Some people might think yes. Some people might think no. Why do you think it's yes?
Because you can't.
And I'm sorry, what's your name?
I'm sorry, my name is Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Because you can't have a Jewish supremacist state on somebody else's land. And if the Palestinians have a right of self-determination, or even a right of equality or democratic rights, you can't have them put in an outdoor prison in Gaza with little rights in the occupied territory.
So that wasn't my question. I'm following where I understand where you're going, but let's break it down first.
In other words, for a Palestinian to say they believe in Zionist beliefs, they don't have a right to exist. That there's a Jewish supremacist state that has a right to take over my land and decide, as Netanyahu just said, we have the exclusive rights from the river to the sea over all of that. So how can a Palestinian say they believe in Zionism unless they don't believe
That wasn't,
in their own right to exist?
so sorry, that wasn't my question.
Well,
I wasn't, that's okay.
You asked I said, why would a Palestinian...
That wasn't my question, sorry. Sorry, I understand you feel passionate about it. My question is it anti-Zionist to say that you believe that Palestinians should have self-determination? That was, and a land of their own. That was my question. I think your answer is you think that is anti-Zionism?
Yes.
Okay. Other thoughts?
No.
Why no?
I think it is perfectly plausible to have a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. Put the current politics aside, right? But certainly in theory, it's plausible. Historically, there were many efforts to do so, going back to the Balfour Declaration, which you mentioned. It didn't play out that way for lots of reasons. But there's no reason that you can't have two states. Yes, it's a small piece of land, but it's not a tiny piece of land. There's enough space there for Palestinians to live and Jews to live, each with their own self-determination.
So the thought would be is in a side-by-side sort of geography of that land. And in the back, somebody saying?
Oh, I mean, I would have said the same thing that David did.
Okay. Any other thoughts? So in my view, I don't think that because I consider myself a Zionist straight up. I believe that there should be a homeland for the Jewish people. But I also understand that there are two people with two different narratives that are in the same land that are there, and it pains me what's going on there. And I don't think that and it's to the Palestinian people, that does not make me an anti-Zionist. And if you're opposed to settlements in the West Bank, does that, and maybe I should qualify it, Jeff, if I could, does that necessarily make you an anti-Zionist? You might be an anti-Zionist and be against settlements, I understand that. But can you still be a Zionist and be against settlements? Please.
Not that I represent that, but I live in Israel.
Ah,
And I am a Zionist who thinks that we should not have settlements in
right.
the West Bank. And that land should eventually somehow or other become Palestinian.
But you're still a
So it's
Zionist.
very possible to think that and still live in Israel and still be a Zionist.
Right. And is there also, I guess, and this is my American view, and because I want to ask you, is I also view that we have really, it's a very small piece of land, but we have kind of three defined kind of areas that are there right now. And so that sometimes I think we get hung up too, understandably, why, as a Zionist, there are some Zionists that want all of Judea and Samaria. I will, again, straight out, because I'm trying to be transparent, that's not my particular view of where it is. It's a wide range of people and a wide range of opinions. We have it in the United States, it's dividing us here, but it's, what I understand, much stronger in Israel. It's dividing people right now, right? Well, thank you for that. Other thoughts? Please.
I'll just point out, Paul, when she said that there was a day, it was sort of in the United States, in the reform conservative spectrum, and it was accepted that settlements, opposing settlements was not anti-Zionist. And I remember when the days when AIPAC's first line always was, people support no programs beyond the green line.
Yeah.
That's nostalgic for those days. So yeah, that's been part of the American strength of Zionism as well. So.
And it's also, I guess, the other question, you know the geography, I don't, as well as this. When we talk about settlements, too, would, in some way, would Jerusalem be a settlement? Certainly where the Kotel is, right? I mean, because if we go back to the 67 lines, it wasn't part of it. And that one is a harder one. And certainly as you move further out, it becomes easier for me to do it. But Jerusalem, I would want to be an open city for all people. And again, the time may not be right for any of these solutions that's going on, but it's like the two-state solution. I would hope, again, being transparent, I would hope that Israel wouldn't do things that would jeopardize the ability to eventually reach a two-state solution. Do I think we can get to a two-state solution today? No. But I don't think that I would ever quit aspiring to that. And that doesn't make me an anti-Zionist. And I think fundamentally the biggest question today is if you're opposed to the current prime minister, the cabinet, some of the steps that they're wanting to take, like, taking over the power of the Supreme Court, and things that, again, you'll understand much better than I will. And I don't mean to keep singling you out, I'm sorry. But I think you can do that and still be a Zionist. And again, I have in my lifetime not been happy with every president of the United States that we've had, and I have spoken out against it, and I imagine different people have felt the same way about different leaders, and it doesn't make you less of an American. So then, let's get to anti-Semitism. And how do we define anti-Semitism? Anybody? What do you think anti-Semitism is?
I'm sure we're going to build on this. But an antipathy or an animosity to Jews because they are Jewish.
Okay. Sort of Jew hatred because somebody is Jewish.
Or bias.
Or a bias against Jews. Okay, please.
Scapegoating.
Scapegoating, part of anti-Semitism, certainly a canard.
A belief that Jews are privileged, they're rich, white, and privileged.
Another trope that the Jews are rich, white, and privileged. One of the things please.
I feel like that comes up when somebody who's not Jewish starts sense with the Jews.
The Jews, sort of this collective sort of either blame or sometimes it's also a positive when somebody has done that. So there are lots of different definitions of anti-Semitism. I have purposefully picked what I think is going to be the most controversial because it's the International Holocaust Remembrance Association one. Because I think it's worth talking about. It's called the IHRA, I-H-R-A. I picked it because I knew not everybody agrees with it. But what it starts with, before it gets to the Israel part that I think is the part that causes some people consternation on it, I'm going to have to read this to you and I'll send the slides out to you. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So I'm going to just break that down a little bit. A little bit different than what you were saying there is it doesn't actually always have to be against Jews, anti-Semitism. When you call somebody, a cheap Jew bastard, they don't have to be Jewish. It can be used in that way, and that would be anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism can be directed against individuals in the interchange they make. It can also be like we unfortunately see way too many swastikas painted on the sides of synagogues and on bridge abutments that are out there. So it can be all of those things. But I think at its root is probably just this hatred of Jews. Now I'm going to get into the part that it says right below that definition. It's important to note that according to IHRA, its definition, first of all, is a non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism. And I am fully aware that by executive order, Governor Lujan adopted that and made that law, and that there's a couple dozen other states in some form or fashion that it's used. It's not always done in a way that makes it for the lawyers that are here, the standard by which you're measured in determining whether or not there's unlawful discrimination, which is what the governor here did. In many places, it's used as guidance. And according to the IHRA definition, their document that's on it, it's really to provide guidance for elected officials, law enforcement, university administrators, educational professionals, and community leaders of what anti-Semitism is and the many different forms it can take. In other words, when somebody's investigating whether something is an anti-Semitic action or not, they could use this as a framework, these examples. And again, you may not agree, everyone may not agree with what the examples are. It wasn't the thought, I think, of the committee that put it together that it was going to end up being put into law and used the way it is, but that's where we are in many, many states, including New Mexico. So here's where we start getting into the issues as it relates to Israel. Manifestations might include the targeting of the state of Israel conceived as a Jewish collectivity. And then it expressly says, however, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism frequently charges Jews with conspiring to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for why things go wrong. It is expressed in speech, writing, visual form, and action, and employs sinister stereotypes and negative character traits, which many of you mentioned. Then I plucked out, there's probably a dozen different examples, but the ones that deal with Israel and the ones for which some people have trouble with. So among the examples provided is denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. And the example that it gives is by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. So it's saying that Jews should not have this right of self-determination. It then says, applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. And nation building, as we know, because we're sitting on the land of other indigenous people, is a terribly ugly business. Using the symbols and images associated with classical anti-Semitism. The examples given are claims of Jews killing Jesus or the blood libel to characterize Israel or Israelis. Where we see that a lot is where the allegation of ethnic cleansing or poisoning the wells is probably even a better one of what we see. Drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. At the Anti-Defamation League, we take a really strong view that there's really no equivalent of the Holocaust but the Holocaust that's out there. But because that's particularly charged for Jewish people, it's used here. And the final example I pulled was holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the state of Israel. And that one, it really hits home because in May of 21, I think was when the last major fight was that went on between the rockets flying Gaza and Israel back and forth on that. In the United States, we had protesters and people that were advocating for the Palestinian narrative that were blaming Jews as a whole. And the worst example of that would be in Los Angeles, where you might have seen where a carload of people came up to a Jewish restaurant where the patrons were eating outside and basically assaulted and chased them. And they didn't stop to say, do you believe that the Palestinians have a right to exist, or that they should have that land, or do you believe in a two-state solution or something like that? They didn't do that. They just blamed the Jews. And we've seen that also take place, unfortunately, on college campuses and in other places, and it has an impact. We just released a survey last week on anti-Semitic attitudes in the United States, and we've done this same survey for 40 or 50 years, and 39% of respondents believe that Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the United States. 23% of the respondents believe that Israel controls the media and can get away with anything. And Jews as a whole, more than twice as, the attitudes as a whole of anti-Semitism in this country nearly doubled from what they were when we last measured 3 years ago. So these things have some impact and some effect, I think, of what's going on. But I think fundamentally, and again, I invite Jeff, or I don't mean to pick on you, but I know I could tell where your position is, but anybody else, the concept of tying together Israel into anti-Semitism seems to be objectionable to some people, right? And so, and I want to give you a voice to be able to say that, why you feel that way. If you're willing, I don't mean to put you on the spot if you're not.
Because I feel like the establishment of a Jewish supremacist state or any ethno-religious nationalist state, and particularly on someone else's land, is racist. And that's what Israel is. Now, we talk about Zionism abstractly in history, and I can argue with you that as much of Zionism is getting Jews out of Europe, England,
So then, let me ask you a question. If that's true, do you also as fervently stand up for the other oppressed lands that are around?
I have spent my life as a civil rights lawyer standing up for black people.
No, I'm not asking, what about Myanmar? What about Taiwan? What about today, Ukraine?
Well, do you, when you criticize the U.S. or do you criticize Israel, does that mean every other country in the world I have to criticize? I
No.
don't know many other countries that have laws that say families that live in one part of the occupied territories can't get together, or that build walls, or that declare themselves an apartheid state. There are, and I certainly don't like Iran, and I don't like Saudi Arabia.
Or-
When I criticize Saudi Arabia, that's not because I'm anti-Muslim. I don't like who they are. So when I criticize Israel and the principle of Zionism, I think it's establishing a Jewish supremacist state on someone else's land. The way you can look at it not being racist, and it's just the extension, and it's getting worse.
Okay.
The two-state solution you're talking about is only something that's talked about while they steal Palestinian land.
Okay.
That's the reality.
I wanted to give you the opportunity to be able to speak, and again, I'll give you another shot at the end, but go ahead, please.
My name is Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
I have worked for human rights in a number of places in this country. I've also been a protective escort, risking my life to protect human rights activists in Guatemala. So my concern is not just Israel. I do consider myself tied very closely to the Jewish people. I feel a connection to the land of Israel. I went once. I cried when I got off the plane. If I went again, I'm sure I would cry again when I got off the plane. I am an anti-Zionist. I am opposed to a Jewish state, as I'm opposed to if Narendra Modi succeeds in creating a Hindu state in India, or Viktor Orban succeeds in creating a Hungarian white Christian state in Hungary, if the right wing in this country succeeds in creating a white Christian state here. Like Jeff, I am opposed to a state that privileges one ethnic or religious group over others living there.
So one of the things that I think about when, if you're against nation states, or ethno-nation states, which I get that. When Israel became legitimately, from my perspective, the United Nations, legally made it a state, if I recall correctly, it was the 59th state, something like that was there. Today we have 139 states that have been created of different things. We have other, the Armenians, just by way of example, others that are seeking out their own homelands for what they are. You may or may not agree with their abilities to do it. I take your word that it's not a double standard that's being done. Often it's treating the double standard of looking at Israel in a different way than we look at these other countries. If you don't believe in the nation states of other ethnies, then that's not a double standard.
Right, one thing, and
Sure, absolutely.
I concentrate on Israel because I feel that the Jewish people are my people. Those are Jewish people doing it. I care more about a crime that my uncle commits than I do about a crime that a stranger commits. And I don't blame all Jewish people because some Jewish people are doing something I disagree with. But I'm more concerned about people with whom I feel I have a connection than about people with whom I don't have a connection.
Right. And I think that's obviously, there's a difference that exists also for people that were, in my mind, that are within the Jewish world, are in the Jewish people, that are looking at it and holding it to your values, your Jewish standards that's there, than what is always consistently said from outside of the Jewish world that tries to, in my view, co-opt some of those things. But again, if you're not applying, if you're not using it as a double standard, then I hear what you're saying. Please.
Hi, my name is Marcel. I have a few things to say. You know, there are a number of other peoples who their right to self-determination has not been actualized. So whether or not that's something that all people should have, certainly whatever issues there are in Israel, this is not the only
Oh, by far, correct, right.
And I think the problem with this question is anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is it's used to shut down conversation about issues that are going on the ground right now in Israel-Palestine. That's the case in the synagogue.
Well, that's,
The people who want to bring awareness and education about human suffering, it's shut down.
yeah, I think that there's a difference between, and that's why I said, I don't think you're necessarily an anti-Zionist if you want to talk about the human suffering that's going on. You're not an if you want to argue about what the borders are or what the policies are, that doesn't make you necessarily an anti-Zionist. If you fundamentally don't believe that there should be a state of Israel and that it's not a legitimate endeavor, then I think that might cross over, that you are an anti-Zionist. I am very active in a lot of protests and a lot of movements that are going on out there. And when I hear, I think the people in this room understand what from the river to the sea means. It means there shouldn't be a state of Israel. I think that at other times I'm in a lot of spaces where people identify themselves as an anti-Zionist, but they aren't saying that there shouldn't be a state of Israel. And it's along a line, a continuum. David, and then Ivy. Oh, I'll start over here with David. I'll go to Devin, and then come back to Ivy.
You started your thing about anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. It's like the cornerstone of anti-Semitism. And there are more Jews in Israel than in the United States. There are 7 million Jews in Israel and maybe 6 million in the United States. So when you start criticizing the Jewish people, Israelis as Jews in Israel, that to me all of a sudden starts to cross over into anti-Semitism because it is a Jewish state. And the thing is that you have to be very, very careful. And I think that's about this, because that's where the two issues begin to merge.
So-
because there are more Jews there than are here.
So you're talking about,
If we're worried about Jewish lives and Jewish people and stuff like that, we have to worry about the Jews in Israel.
David saying you can't forget the Jews in Israel, which are more than the Jews in the United States. I think part of it, from my perspective, is also is it's an understanding that anti-Semitism is more than anti the religion of the Jews. It's the Jewish people. That's why I say it's Jew hatred. So to me, the hard part is that because identity and what I was trying to prove, not everybody's going to agree with it, I understand that, but because my identity as a Jew is as a member of the Jewish people, the peoplehood is tied to that land irrespective of my religion and my religious beliefs. And to those, that is why it gets in the Venn diagram from, and I don't mean to be picking on, just staring at you, I'm sorry, but in the Venn diagram of what's going on, that's why the attack on Israel can, not always is, but can cross into that area of anti-Semitism for me. Devin.
So I think that there were other groups of people that were indigenous to the land before the Jews, which were the Canaanites. But as far as I know, none of those peoples exist anymore today. And so the Jews, I guess, are the most indigenous people to the land. So my question is, are Palestinians / Arabs indigenous to the land?
Yeah.
Are they more or less indigenous to the land? And if an indigenous group is displaced from their homeland, do they deserve to go back? And do they deserve the support going back to their homeland?
And the question is if Jews go back so far in that land and are indigenous people to it, can the Palestinians be indigenous people to it also? My particular view on it is, yes. There are those that would argue, if you go to the city of David, or whatever that's called in the eastern part of Jerusalem, they're digging for politics, like who can get lower and find more stuff. It doesn't matter at some point in time. If you have a tie to that land, you have I believe the Palestinian people have an authentic narrative that ties to that land, just like the Jews do, that's there. The Jews might have been there first, the Canaanites, the Philistines, the whoever might have been there first. As a peoplehood, the Jewish people throughout that time have maintained that tie to the land is my only point. Ivy, and then I'll come back to you.
Actually, Devin made a big part of my point, which is I would suggest that people think about Jews returning to Palestine as indigenous people returning to their homeland. That's why they find, we're not colonists coming in and just taking over, because that's why they find artifacts in Hebrew and all the ancient rituals, because we lived there for thousands of years. Okay, we were exiles, and now there are other people there, and I personally believe they have a claim on that land too, which is why the UN decided on partition, which was rejected by, one side to the party, and so part of me is saying, let's go back and have that negotiation about how to determine who has which part of this land. But as Jews, we have an indigenous claim to that land as much as the Palestinians, so let's negotiate away.
So just to repeat, in case you couldn't hear, is I think it's an understanding that both peoples have an indigenous claim on that land that's there, and that it's what really needs to happen is those parties need to negotiate their resolution. One of the concerns that I know that people have on that is one of the sides has much more power and much more influence than the other side does. Please, and then I'll come back to you.
Back to something that you said earlier, because I think it's important. You mentioned Governor Lujan Grisham issued an executive order actually giving teeth to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism and ordering all state agencies to use it in determining whether there's discrimination or anti-Semitic discrimination. And I just want to point out, I'm a lawyer, I read every single statute in every state and every executive order in every state. And Governor Lujan Grisham's executive order is an outlier. The only other state with an executive order within a teeth is Ohio. Every other state with an executive order says, Iowa has a definition, therefore we're against anti-Semitism. The statutes in states where they're passed are generally the same, except for, I think, Iowa, Florida, and Texas say public schools have to use the definition.
Yeah,
So,
actually,
generally, it's just mentioned and it doesn't mean anything, but New Mexico is an outlier in that the governor's executive order is actually ordering government agencies to consider criticism of Israel, seriously consider and look at whether criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. And
in determining when there's unlawful discriminatory conduct motivated by anti-Semitism. So, and just because I looked this up before yesterday, New Mexico is the 6th state overall to incorporate it into law. It's the only one to do it by executive order. Florida, South Carolina, Iowa, Arizona, and Tennessee enacted laws using the definition through legislation. And then there's 22 other states that have endorsed the IRA definition as an educational tool through resolutions or executive orders. So New Mexico is different than the others, and for sure. In a bigger sense, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're now at about 28 states that in some form or fashion have done it, whether it's right or wrong. Yeah, from the legal perspective. I think you were going to speak, and then I'll come back to you. I hear you, and I also hold as the Jewish value of being the light unto the nations and the other things that might motivate me to be displeased with certain policies. But I also look, like, for instance, of what happened when, and I don't want to get too technical into the history, when Transjordan, was broken up and how that was done and what people got displaced from where. And why, if the Palestinian people were those that were indigenous to what is now the state of Israel within those boundaries, but may have been kicked out of other places that occurred in that, because the whole Levant area was never divided up this way until, Pico Sykes and these people came along to decide, the French and the British came along and decided where to put boundary lines that were here. So it's more complicated, I think, than any of it. And the parts that I think that I object and where I think it starts to cross into that anti-Semitism side of it is when we hold Israel to this different standard than we're holding the others to. They're all probably failures. The United States is a failure. We're the worst because of what we did.
Not so much would it be nice if everyone could have a homeland, full nation. The issue is it starts to get shifted. When we implement that fantasy, are we violating people's rights? Have lots of countries violated? Is Israel doing something different? Now it becomes a different issue.
But why is that different, though? Because we're living with, we're living...
The issue of, do the Palestinians have a right to self-determination? Do the Jews? It's a great idea if it could be done with everyone being happy. That's not the issue. The issue is, can we implement it?
Well, again, if I look back at the different offers that were made to Israel, going back to prior to the Balfour Declaration through Oslo, of what it is, it seemed to me that not all Israelis, because I can't speak for them any more than I can speak for all Jews, were willing to at least divide the land in certain ways. And that, by and large, the other side didn't want to do that. So it works both directions in terms of what the reality is to be able to make it happen. I know we're getting up to 4 o'clock. And please, you were gonna, and I apologize.
Hi, my name is Janet. I'd like to come back to the issue of New Mexico and the governor's executive order. The order accepts the International Holocaust
Definition.
Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, which is said over and over again was meant for research purposes, but that seems a little bit spurious because once it was out in the public sector, it was there to be used. And I'm concerned about the marginalization within the Jewish community and within the larger community of New Mexico and in the country of voices that are critical, deeply, profoundly critical of the actions of the Israeli government in terms of human rights abuses. And I'm concerned that this use of the IHRA definition, which includes an example but doesn't really go into great detail, that criticizing Israel can be seen in certain circumstances as anti-Semitism, excuse me. I believe there may be efforts in New Mexico to bring the governor's executive decision to become a bill and to be voted on, in which case it would be law. So I'd like to know, I find that a chilling prospect here. I'm a Jewish person who holds very strong opinions about human rights abuses in Israel and in the territories. So I'd like to know what the ADL thinks about taking the IHRA definition and enshrining it in local places or in the federal government as law.
We have not been the lead proponent of that. I'll leave it at that, of enshrining that in law. We've not opposed it either, though I want to be straight to that. But I guess from my perspective, one of the things that, and that's why I went through those particular items, because I think that the IRA definition has been conflated or blown up, from my perspective, into more than what it actually says and what those examples are. If Jeff is going to call Israel a racist country, I'm quoting you, right? I think that's what you said.
Yeah,
So,
Jewish supremacist state is
okay.
racist as what the
So, calling it racist, comparing it to Nazis, doing those kind of things, yes. If you think that that's chilling your effect to argue against the policies, I don't think I have the sympathy in that regard. I think there are limits. You can argue and criticize and talk about the policies of Israel as much as you want to, but for me, where the bottom lines of it come to, because I was asked to answer the question, and then this is really as much me as probably more than the ADL, but I think it fits within my lane. When does anti-Zionism become anti-Semitism? When it denies the Jews the right to national self-determination by erasing our peoplehood and connection to the land rather than just opposing the government policies. I think that is. If it leverages historic anti-Semitic ideas, these tropes that we've talked about, then I think that's anti-Semitic. If it singles out Jews when most people believe that Israel has a right to exist, in other words, to blame all of us as Jews when the majority of people think it has a right to exist, that could be. If it argues that a national movement for Jews is unacceptable among national movements while supporting other national movements, and that's why I bow to you, because if you don't support other national movements, then you're being consistent. If it divides Jews into good and bad, only those who oppose their own national movement are acceptable. That, I think, is a problem. And I think that works both directions. I think you're absolutely right about that. And if it deems the world's only Jewish state is illegitimate or is somehow uniquely evil, often compared to the Nazis, and therefore argues that the state should end, I think that crosses over into anti-Semitism. Again, those are my beliefs. This isn't an easy issue. It's clearly dividing a lot of people. It's dividing the community about it. I think that we all have to go back to the original guidelines that I set out, and let's try to assume some good intent that's there. But I think we have to, in order to try and move forward and get past this, we're going to have to be actively engaged, not only in just talking and filibustering each other, which I've been known to do, but actually listening as well to where it's at. So I wish I could have given you a magic wand that would have answered all of this, but I hopefully at least gave you a safe forum for people to be able to talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for everybody who attended.
should come in late tomorrow, but I'll probably be there at like 10. So, because that was your all day. Yeah. So, all right. Take it easy. Have a good night. You too.